I actually think this was a perfect organic segue because I'm actually fascinated by this because I'm engaging with both of you two now, but I've always, in my former career, when you and I would talk regularly, Spencer would come up a lot, and you being at games, at youth baseball games would come up a lot, so you're a baseball dad, actively following in the stat lines, and then I meet Danny, or not meet Danny, but reconnect with Danny, and he's further in the weeds, like eyeballs deep, and like he's pulling up the live stream, the stats,
he can't
vicarious living is happening here.
He can't even see out of the weeds.
Well, I know I suck at baseball, so I make an active decision to not vicarious. Like Eli will try me because if I tell him something, he knows he's better than me, so he'll be like, "Why are you telling me this?" So I have to go get like an Adrian or something to tell him.
It's become too stat oriented. All of these dads,
the game in general,
others the game in general, but I'm talking about youth baseball.
Got it.
When we were kids, and you're a lot younger than I am. I think Danny, you're younger than I am too. We didn't have game changer. These kids know what they're hitting. They know how many stolen bases they have. They know how many runs they've scored. And it's all fugazi. By the way, can we curse or no?
Yeah, for sure.
It's all fugazi's not a curse anyway.
Yeah.
But it's all fugazi because like you can hit a ground ball to short that you got jammed on and beat it out, and now you 1 for 1 that day, as you guys know, as opposed to 2 ropes to the left fielder. You're 0 for the left fielder catches. You're 0 for 2. Batting average should never be, and you taught me that, Adrian, that should never be a stat that we're looking at, but certainly not for 9-year-olds. And so it's just a very different thing. I know Danny will say differently. When I get angry, I'm into it, and that happens sometimes, but I try to relax because it's just, Skip Schumacher told me, until they got hair on their chest, nothing matters.
That makes sense.
They're 9-year-olds.
Yeah.
And in your case, 10-year-old.
Yep.
What really stands out is that you're both very active and like active participators in your son's baseball story, journey, all of that. And I meant that from a total respect standpoint. I like that. And now I got a 1.5-year-old at home. I don't know if she's going to play or be connected to baseball in any way. If I have a son, I'm sure that'll be a more organic segue into it. But watching you guys go through it, and then Giancarlo, who runs an account called Legends of Dade, part of our whole production. His son is, I believe, 6.
Yeah, he's doing it.
And he's doing the entrance into the journey, and he's just as like...
Well, our kids have played together since they're 3. That's the thing about living down here, having moved from New York City. You start playing T-ball. I mean, we literally started playing T-ball at 3, and you play 2 seasons a year.
That was
because
me.
You have spring and fall, whereas where I grew up, you're playing in spring only. And by the way, when you start in March and April, it's fucking cold.
Which is where, Ox? Where are you from originally?
Jersey. Yeah, Jersey.
Where in Jersey?
South Orange, New Jersey.
South Orange, New Jersey.
Yeah, I was the kid, and Danny and I won't name names, but we know some of these kids who at 7 years old was the best player, the best 7-year-old in the history of New Jersey.
You were the early bloomer.
And then never got any better. Like literally never got any better. I remember like the 3rd level intermediate, I just couldn't hit. And I was like, wait, what's happening here? But yeah, I grew up in Jersey. My dad really taught me the game. And Adrian, what I thought you were going to say is you were always impressed with how much I actually knew baseball on the business side when we would argue about Marlins related things. Wow. You haven't gotten there
I see what you did there. That was clever. Yeah.
But my dad taught me the game, was always my number 1 sport.
Was his number 1 sport too?
His number 1 sport, yeah. He grew up going to Shea Stadium.
Mets or Yankees driven?
Like he grew up going to Shea Stadium, but was a Yankee fan, but went to more Mets games. And then my childhood, my first game, I was 5 years old, was a Yankee game. We actually have a picture of me meeting Don Mattingly at my first game. We had very good seats right behind the first base dugout. The Yankees were on the first base side. And as Adrian knows, that was the manager when I first took over parts of the business for the Marlins. And we had a nice laugh. I showed him the picture. But ultimately, I became a Mets fan. And the reason I became a Mets fan was because it was easier to take the train from Jersey to Queens, New Jersey Transit in and get right on the 7 than it was to get to Yankee Stadium. And 12, 13 years old, I wanted to go watch baseball games by myself. I loved the sport that much and I really understood it. And it was just easier for me to get to Mets games and Yankee games. And my parents trusted that I could take one train and not make the switch. And so I became a Mets fan at like 12, 13, and then was huge Mets fan.
Who was that first player that caught your attention?
Piazza, but that was a little later. They traded for Piazza when I was like 17, I think, 97. I think my favorite player in like the 12, 13 age, which would have been 2012, 2013, I think it was Carl Everett. Remember Carl Everett, switch
center
hitter?
fielder.
Of course.
But yeah, I still remember where I was when the Mets traded for Mike Piazza. That was a game changer. And then I was fortunate enough to have interned for the New York Mets for a summer and then worked 7 seasons in the New York Mets organization, which was sort of a dream come true.
I want to explore the internship angle because that's how I entered the game as well. What department did you intern in first?
So it's interesting because I'm sure you were in operations. I actually interned for the New Jersey Nets, and that's how old I am. They were still in New Jersey. And there I interned in basketball operations. But for the Mets, I interned in TV production. I was a production assistant. And, interesting, my summer was the summer just before 9/11. So I guess it was 2001 summer that led into September. But a lot of the restrictions on clubhouses and access and those kinds of things that came shortly after September 11th weren't in place because I was there May, June, July, August of 2001. But I was a production assistant. So I worked on the TV truck, but I just ran errands for the producer. That could be going to get the lineup. That could be doing interview sound after the game. I actually have 2 really good stories that are probably worth sharing in this context. I had gone on semester at sea, which is an abroad program where you go on a boat around the world. I don't know if you guys knew that. So my second semester, thanks Mom and Dad. So my second semester junior year, I went around the world on a boat. And again, continuing the theme, I'm old. We didn't have internet on the boat yet. There were internet cafes when you got to certain ports. We didn't have internet on the boat. So whereas I had 2 internships in sports with the Nets, my summer after my junior year, I didn't have an internship. And my mom, typical Jewish mom, well, why don't you have an internship? It's like, well, it's hard to get an internship when you're in Malaysia and India and Vietnam. So actually, true story, and you both know me well, I started working at Ruby Tuesdays as a waiter, which is not something that I think you could see me doing well, and that was quite short-lived. And I was playing on a men's softball team. And I had a guy on my men's softball team who was the statistician for the Mets on, at the time, Fox Sports New York. And he was going on a 3-week trip to Italy. And so he said to me, hey, would you backfill me? And so I did. And that's how I befriended the producer. And then when he came back, he said, you shouldn't leave. And they paid me $100 a game. I had my mom's car, so I didn't have to pay for gas. And I would drive from New Jersey to Shea Stadium, get there 2 o'clock, leave at 11, and do it again the next day. It was a dream. You knew all the players, knew Bobby Valentine was the manager, who taught me a lot about the game. The other story I was going to tell, they used to have day games, well, they still have day games in the afternoon, although now it's crazy times. Most teams on Saturdays play at 4 o'clock, and Sundays only one team can play before 1:40. Everyone used to play at 1 o'clock back then. And if the game ended early, the Mets were on WPIX, which was like the, now I think it's called the CW, but it would be followed by Everybody Loves Raymond or something like that. And they always had a 3-hour window. If the game ended more quickly than 3 hours, the sideline reporter, whose name at the time was Matt Laughlin, would have to carry until the 3-hour mark for the next. So the production assistant would have to go into the clubhouse and ask the manager the first interview, which they still do. Right? Like, I don't know who the Marlins, I guess Kelly Sacco would be the first person, right? The TV person's always the first one that asks the question. So if Matt on a Saturday or Sunday was up or on the field carrying until 4, I'd have to ask the first question. And Bobby Valentine was notorious for ripping your head off if you didn't ask the right question. And so I remember standing in the tunnels of Shea Stadium, just practicing in my mind, what was I gonna ask, what was I gonna ask? And as they would do it, they would cut off me. You would just see the mic, and you might not even hear the question, you would just hear the answer. Right. But I would practice and practice, and it was really cool, because the next day, sometimes he'd find me on the field during batting practice, and he'd say, you asked about the relief decision in the 9th inning, but the key play was in the 8th inning. So he taught me a lot about the game that way.
Yeah,
I didn't know we were going to talk about internships, but those are 2 good stories.
But it's amazing. That is a good story, and it's like a highest level accountability stuff, because like you're facing the manager, and then the other interesting part is like the first question is like you get the manager's most like real reaction
because he's just off the field.
And like you get the emotionally charged reception to your question. So like even higher pressure on the quality of the question.
And then Bobby plus at the time, right? He obviously didn't have a great stint in Boston, but he was known as a cerebral, you better bring your A game. And it was really, really cool. Frightening, but cool.
Yeah, but that's a good place to cut your teeth as like an intro to baseball and really forward facing too. So that's cool. So, and then you stay with the organization for a progression of years after that?
No, then I went to finish college, got a job with Madison Square Garden for 4 years. My first 4 years were at Madison Square Garden, which at the time owned either the live events rights for the Knicks, Rangers, Liberty, or the TV rights at the time. Yes had just started, so they didn't have the TV rights for the Yankees, but they still had the TV rights for the Mets. So a great place to learn how to sell sponsorships, but not actually the one selling, supporting the sales staff. And then the Mets announced that they were starting SNY in 2006, March of 2006. So in 2005, I cold reached out to a gentleman named Steve Rabb, who is still the president of SNY. At the time, he was the head of business development. And I just pitched my candidacy and got a job with SNY in probably February of 06. And the network launched in March of 06. And so I was between the network and then the last 2 years selling the integrated property, both the network but also the team assets. Because at the time, the Wilpons owned both. Obviously, that's different now. But so I was there for, my first season was 2006. And you baseball historians, the Mets ran through the NL East in 2006. That's when Beltran struck out looking in Game 6 of the NLCS. And I was like, oh shit, this is going to always be like this. And then in 2007, same thing. Infamously 7-game lead, 17 games to go against the Phillies and collapsed. And no team I was ever associated with got back to the playoffs until 2023 when I got to the Marlins. But anyway, so I was with the Mets from the Mets organization.
You don't count 2020?
No. Because you and I both know.
We'll get into that.
You and I both
we
know
will get
that
into
if that had been a 160 game season. And I love Mike Kill. I love that staff, everything. But if that had been a 162, that team wasn't making the playoff. Remember, we started like 9-3.
Oh, I remember.
And then held on 31-29.
I remember. I was in the bubble, and I will refute this. I will bat this back until
we can get there. But we're not chronologically
being in
there
the
yet.
bubble of it, like the 13 roster subtractions in one night. You have to fill in overnight. To then, in a 60-game season, still play at the level, because everybody's playing 60 games as well. The 60-game season is fine. To then beat the Cubs in the first series makes it more real, because the Cubs won their division decisively that year.
That's fair, but it was pitching. And I remember, I think Sandy was great.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think over 162, we wouldn't have scored enough runs to be with the top dogs in that category.
We had that 5-game series at home against the Phillies where we were tied late. I think 2 doubleheaders, but that ended up turning it around. But anyway, chronologically, we're jumping around. So that's and why.
The impetus on that, just to clarify, was to build the team for those 60 games. So you had the free agency gap and you had a deadening of spring training to build it for this direction.
I hit a nerve here.
And I guess, but I'm not salty about it. I think it wouldn't be a credit to all those people that participated in it outside of myself.
Well, I'm not trying to take credit away. I'm just saying.
I know you're not.
It was a slow burn to hold on to 31-29. There's a reason that baseball seasons are 162.
The slowest burn ever. We're at the Braves to finish out the year, and I thought we wouldn't win a game. We had 12 games left, and it felt like we weren't going to win another game, and we only needed to win 2 or 3 in empty stadiums, empty Brave Stadium,
I got
empty
to go
Yankee
to those
Stadium.
games. I remember that.
To then clinch at Yankee Stadium.
Yep.
That I can't just act like that didn't happen. And not just for myself.
Right. The Cubs sweeping the Cubs. But then would you say, now we're all over the place. Would you say that losing to the Phillies in 23 means that was illegitimate because they got swept? No.
No, but somehow that team felt less prepared for the postseason than the 2021 was.
Well,
partially
no
Sandy,
because Sandy
no
was
Yuri.
gone.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's why.
For sure. But that's relevant. We decisively beat the Cubs in the first series. Yeah, that tells you belong in that category.
100%.
And Sixto was on another world
back
then. And so that's me seeing, I don't know, it's one of my favorite baseball moments. Even though you couldn't share, you couldn't celebrate.
Well, congratulations.
You celebrated and you go right to your hotel, all of that. So
Danny, get in here.
Well, wait, I was trying to slow us down because I want to know from, you were in the Mets in early 2000s. You're in the NL East as of, a few months ago.
Yeah.
What's one thing when you go back to those early, the first go around with the Mets? I talk about Bobby Valentine, 2001 that you're like, man, baseball then or working for a major league club then was so different than now in this way?
Well, I think that's an great question. Thankfully, one of the two of you asked good questions. But, I think it's interesting. Part of it is just the level you're at. Right. So I don't know that I'm really qualified to answer that question, because in 2001, I was a production assistant running around, bringing water to the top of the booth and getting the lineup and like grunt work, which was awesome. And they're paying me for it. And then my first stint with the Mets, I was selling advertising for the TV network. And then I did do a couple of outfield wall deals for the team. But it's very different with being, one of the executives, came as the head of sponsorship, then took over ticket sales and the chief commercial officer. So a lot more, right? So it's hard to make a comparison. I think what's interesting, and it's ultimately, I think what you're getting at is, and I don't want to say that you lose the love, because again, Adrian would see me during a 5-game losing streak or a 5-game winning streak, and I never lost the passion or the love. But I think once you realize the business side of it, it's just very different than when you're 21 as an intern or 26 to 30 as a low-level sales guy in an organization where there's really no stress. If they had a bad ticket sales day, but my Nissan sign was up behind home plate, I didn't care. Whereas then when
stakes are lower.
Right? The stakes are lower. Then when you're an executive, maybe the outfield wall signs are sold and look great, but the ticket sales are low. Or maybe the ticket sales are great, but the food operation, and you're a Marlins fan, so you've been to the concessions, which sometimes can take a minute, right? And so then you have to worry about that piece of it, and how does it affect retention? Someone's never been to a game before, but are they going to come back? What was their experience like? What was the parking like? All of those things are much more sort of macro and grandiose when you're in charge of a lot of part of the business. And I think that's across the board, right? That's not just for the Marlins. I think when you have multiple responsibilities, it's like whack-a-mole, right? One, okay, this is taken care of, but then you have 3 or 4 others. But I will segue, and I'm really good at this, the segues.
Shameless plug.
Go ahead.
In between the SNY role and getting to the Marlins, as you know, I was a marketing agent at Excel Sports Management for 5.5 years. Started there as the 16th employee. Today they have 400 employees.
By the way, I had all this background ready to set you up, and you're setting yourself up on all your whole resume.
I've done this before. But the funny part is, you talk about not losing the love, but realizing it's a business. Yeah. I remember getting there, and I started in September of 2012. And it was at that time, it was heavily basketball focused. Casey Close had started the baseball division. Derek Jeter was there, but they were still building that business. Jeff Schwartz, who's the president of Excel, was already, not the Casey was an established baseball agent, but Casey brought Derek and then built it. Jeff already had the best, so we were very basketball focused. But I remember that first trade deadline, January, February, they would say things like, oh, Agent X wants to move player Y. And I'd say, well, but what? That's not good for the fans. That's not good for the team. Oh, no. Agent X wants player Y to be in market Z. And that's the first time you realize, and again, you guys are shaking your heads. We're a little bit older. Adrian, you specifically have been on that side of it. Right. But it's like, I'm at the time 32, 33, I guess 32. And I'm like, wait, what? But I'm a Nets fan. And I don't think I'm just making it up. I don't think, no, we want to keep that guy. It's like, no, maybe his mom, wife, the agent, this, right? And you realize so much more that goes on. And so I think that's when it started to change for me. Not in a bad way, but you have a little bit more eyes open than I think the average fan does about what happens day to day.
I'm glad you touched that, because I think the agency component to this gets slept on or under appreciated, valued, but also like it feels like they don't get presented outwardly or publicly as the force within the game that they are.
Yeah,
right?
But I think that's the good agents don't.
Correct, but
not that Boris isn't good, but everybody knows Boris. Yeah. The ones who are doing it in the shadows, there's less scrutiny on them, and so maybe that's better.
But then you do like you get into a draft room or you get into a deadline, you realize where the levers are in terms of like positioning players, what the signing bonus needs to be. Also not participating in the all-star game, like showing up to the draft kind of thing, where NFL, NBA, the union could just be like, they're in lockstep and be like, okay, hey, this is what we're going to do. Whereas the agents kind of hold the other lever on the baseball side. So they play this really prominent role that I think people think it's just like front office and players, and there's this other entity influencing outcomes.
I had heard that the number 1 draft pick this time, Eli Willits, I heard he only tried out for 2 teams. or worked out for two teams?
Yeah, probably that makes sense if he specifically decided to work out for two different teams because the player holds that option.
That's an agent decision, is my point.
Agent decision for sure.
And so even though he might have been projected a little bit lower, ended up going first, who knows what, kudos to the agent. If they only had him work out for these two clubs, and is the agent a friend of mine? Sure. But
yeah.
Let me ask you a question while we're on the agents. I wanted to get to this later, but we're talking about agents. So we hear a lot of buzz about salary cap, salary floor, the labor war that's on the horizon. A lot of talk is the players that are making $50 million a year when they sign their big deal versus the average player. And that's sort of the tension, right? Because you put a cap, it's going to hurt the highest earning players, might help the other players. The agents, if I'm an agent, especially a big time one, I'd rather have these giant contracts where I make money, boom, on one deal as opposed to having to have a lot of clients to make that same amount of money.
Sure.
Is that a factor, you think, in the lockout? What's the agent's role in this upcoming labor battle that we see on the horizon?
It's being the other side, in my opinion, in conjunction with the players' union, being the other side of the. Yes, it's some of the players form the board, but it seems that the agents are acting more, with a heavier hand on behalf of the players versus the players isolated themselves in this negotiation. Like the agents, to me, they're just in every conversation, in every direction you look, and they can steer that conversation based on what's happening. Now, the team has its own input on that, but I think they play this pivotal role in this entire professional baseball world that I think is interesting.
I fully agree with Adrian. I think, and Danny, I think you said it. The amount of folks that are getting paid like Juan Soto or others are actually an aberration, but they're the loud minority as opposed to the silent majority, right? So that's what's going to get all the press, the big contracts and the agents who have done that, and we need to protect that. Adrian would know better than I, having been on the ops side as opposed to the business side, but the large majority make league minimum or shortly over it or are just trying to get to arbitration to get a little bit of growth, right? But that's the silent majority until games start being missed, right? And ultimately, again, Adrian would know better, having been on that side in 2021, I guess that was. But, you're hearing about the council, and that's the Max Scherzers of the world who are really in the 200-300 millions.
Right.
But once the guy making, at the time, 725 starts losing a paycheck, as I think all of us here start losing paychecks, maybe we're a little bit more relatable to that guy than maybe Max Scherzer. I'm not going to check your bank account, but I would assume.
More relatable, yeah.
Right. So when that starts happening, that's when the union starts breaking a little bit. But if you remember, the press was all about the executive council. They don't want to do this deal. They didn't recommend the deal. And then the players voted for the deal, right? And interestingly, if you remember at the time, and I'm not smart enough to know who won, what was right or wrong, but I remember the PA celebrating that the league minimum went from like 7 or 720 to 770 because so many more people are affected by that. And you're in that contract for 4 years before you might even get to ARB, right? Or 3 years now before you might even get to ARB. So the focus was there, even though the press and the noise is about the top players. So
the thing on the agent side, it's like to win those battles for all those variety of players that you need to accumulate just to get the money that you would get from one giant contract.
But is that in the best interest of the game? That's the question, right?
Heck no.
So if you're an agent who's focused on protecting that, the top 1%'s ability to get here, But by the way, I'm a son of a labor lawyer, so I'm always going to side on the union side, or else I wouldn't be able to speak to my dad. But where's the majority, right? And for us as fans, and now all three of us are not in the game anymore, so we're all fans, what's the best thing for the fans?
Yeah,
right?
Small market.
Hopefully that's what they have to be thinking about, because to the sport's credit, it's on a little bit of an upswing. The attendance is up, the ratings are up. They've done a really nice job letting players be players. They're marketing the players better, right? So the WBC, I know we're gonna talk about that, certainly helped in 23, will continue to help in 26. But the sport, with the popularity of the other sports, the WNBA included, the NHL included, the sport can't really afford to have labor issues. And as we know as fans, right? And again, Adrian and I have been in the game, so maybe we can take sides with a little bit of knowledge. But Danny, you as a fan, you don't care who was right or wrong. You just want your kids not to miss games. And you're a season ticket member and you don't want to miss games. And so this idea that it's like, no, it's on the players, or no, it's on the owners. The real fan, they don't give a shit who it's on. It's everybody. And then can the game rebound from that? So hopefully they're smart enough.
And a cap and a floor. You know, if the cap hurts the players to a certain degree, the floor is going to hurt the owners to a certain degree. You know, you're a small market fan.
Is there no? But you want to talk about that? Okay, are you calling yourself a small market fan or a small market fan?
I am in a market where the team does not spend a lot on players. The market, I know the market's huge. This is the #1 baseball producing city in the planet.
But even just from a market perspective,
giant,
if you don't include Palm Beach, it's still the 18th biggest market in America. If you include Palm Beach, it's even bigger than that. So, you know, that was on your list of questions. What's it like to work for a small market team? You know, I'll tell you, there's a lot of discussion internally that we shouldn't be marketing and branding ourselves as a small market team, because we're not. This is a major market.
The other sports don't dictate that you are. The Dolphins, the Heat, even Inter to a certain extent, they operate as like a larger market club, even though they're in the same market that we're in. So how would you categorize the market? Is it a mid-tier? Is it I know payroll-wise, it's in the small, that's because
the lowest
it's
in
like
the league
small
right
market
now.
is traveling with payroll, but in this particular case, it's not the 30th ranked market in all of baseball. Miami, South Florida, especially if you include the Palm Beaches.
Yeah.
It's where does it rank actually? Does it travel with LA, New York, Boston? No, right? It's a tier below those markets, but it's not. It's somewhere in the middle, somewhere above.
I think we spend too much time worrying about what's the market size. It's really about the fan base, the interest, because that's what people are buying, right? Ultimately, your question is, where does the market rank?
Yeah.
Is a segue or is a ... to how does that affect the business, right? Nobody cares about the market sizes other than how it affects the business. Right. The business is affected by the value of the marks, the attendance, the win-loss record, the affinity, all of those kinds of things, right? And I think the team's doing a nice job trying to grow those things. But today, those are, you know, and this is just empirical, those are in the lower end of the 30 club spectrum. Yeah. The question then just becomes, to your guys' point, if it's a market that can sustain it, what comes first? Spending, and then the revenue comes behind it, or revenue and then spending comes behind it? I would say, and again, Adrian, I don't know how connected you are still to folks in the baseball operations department, but I think it's a strategic, now talking Marlins specific, I think it's a strategic decision that the best way to compete, even at a little larger scale against the behemoths, is to be smarter, draft better, develop better, focus on different, fielding or base running or whatever it is on the margins, Adrian, as you would know, because you're never going to be able to spend with the Phillies and the Dodgers and the Mets. I know there's people that would say, hey, look at what Steve Cohen did. There are owners that could do that. But again, that's not dissimilar to our discussion on the lockout or strike. Those are those are anomalies. I think for the most part, most teams are around the same. The question is, can you do those things and then also have a $120 million payroll as opposed to a $60 million payroll, right? But listen, I just read something yesterday. The Marlins have the most games played by rookies this year by like 300 games, not even close. And they're fighting hard. So, right, I think they would say that they're ahead of schedule on the build, and they're ahead of the Braves in the records today, and clearly the Braves are spending more. So is it money?
I think what's less true, though, to that point in today's day and age, and Danny and I talk about this, is you need to tear it all down to lose as many games as possible, to accumulate as many, benefits from having lost that many games, where you shore up the things that are going to build your future value. It feels incompatible right now. Like, you could lose the most games and end up with the 7th or 8th pick.
That's what happened to the Marlins.
Right. So, I watched that happen in real time and feeling like, okay, so this is not true anymore. Driving it down to this level, it's not playable.
But you're assuming that they were trying, I don't think people tank in baseball. I don't think that they tried to lose. I think it was, let's just, if you're going to win 60 games, 70 games, you can do it with a smaller payroll, right? Like you're talking about last year or the year before.
Your roster construction, you're not, the people executing the game plan are not trying to lose the games, neither are the players. But then on the roster building component, you know you're doing things, you know when you're making decisions that are going to reduce your wins and runs, like as you're doing it, right? So for sure. But I think that there are levels and degrees to it in terms of different types of free agency you can participate in.
Totally.
Spotlight a Gleyber Torres on a 1-year deal, $16 million. That's not all the way at the top of free agency. It's not at the bottom. There are tiers. There are 1-year deals, 2-year deals for $8.5 million. Like there are things that you could do while not also having to run payroll to its minimum.
But let me ask you a question. And again, you know this well. And this year's Marlins team, and again, it's whatever today's date is, July 22nd. So who knows where it'll be at September, but we're having this conversation today. They've made some of the decisions that you're talking about. And as of today, they scored more runs than the Mets have.
Yeah, I agree that I think that they're on a good trajectory.
Right.
I actually have positive things to say, both from inside and outside.
But I'm just saying, and that might not be the case in September, but I don't know that roster decisions necessarily always play out the way you might project them to.
They do now, though. Leading up to the trade deadline, for example, like the roster decision you make right now will drastically affect your win total, your second half.
But so the question I was going to ask you before, and again, you know this as well as I do, and this is a good segue into talking maybe about the Marlins business a little bit. Like the Marlins were $16 million is affordable for Gleyber Torres. You're 100% right. But on a 1-year deal, what does that do for the Marlins? So
it depends.
On one side, are they going to win? And with the roster that they had,
you have to win in the first half, carrying that salary.
Are they projecting enough wins that one player is going to be a difference maker?
Sure.
And then and on the business side, and again, Danny, you come into this too, is Gleyber Torres enough to change the business? Who comes to games, sponsor support, all of those things, right? So it's if you're sitting in the owner's seat, I could write a $16 million check for Gleyber Torres, or I can run out Otto Lopez and Xavier Edwards for $770 each and maybe get the same production because the Gleyber's right. And again, as a guy who was in charge of trying to monetize the fan base and sell, I would have done cartwheels for Gleyber Torres, but I just don't know that it would have changed anything. And that's the conundrum that the ownership is in, is you're trying to build it. Is there one guy, even Juan Soto, not that the Marlins were going to get Juan Soto, but if you plop Juan Soto onto the Marlins team, projected going into the year, now to their credit, pleasant surprise have played great. But if you drop Juan Soto onto the Marlins roster construction in April, you don't think that changes the day-to-day.
Well, here's the problem from a fan perspective is 1-year deal. So let's say Gleyber Torres, everybody loves him. Was he Venezuelan? Gleyber Torres?
Yeah.
The Venezuelan community goes crazy. What happens when the year's done? Now you're getting rid of him, and you're back to the same problem with the Marlins.
The perception. It's a great point.
I keep talking about the salary floor and cap just because as a Marlins fan, this is like what I'm fixated on as a fan. Because if you look at like the Oklahoma City Thunder, they are a real small market. And they have to do things differently
but
too.
But they are in a small market. Well, again, the market is small,
right?
But they're the only show in town.
True.
Their fanaticism is through the roof, and I would bet that their sponsorship revenue at 41 games at an 18,000 person venue is greater than the Marlins sponsorship revenue, just because of what they mean in that market.
And look what happened to them. They made smart decisions. You can't sign free agents necessarily, so they do have limitations. You can't just go and get the marquee free agent and say, come to Oklahoma City.
But then they kept them. That's what you're getting at.
They drafted them and they kept them, and you knew they were paying top dollar for them because there's a cap and a floor. Their max players is what it costs. We pay them, and it's
so
done.
Then the question becomes, can they afford, and I don't know the answer, it's not even rhetorical, I wonder what it is. Can they afford to keep them because of all the revenue that they drove in the last couple of years being good or what they project to drive? Or is the owner willing to lose to be able to win multiple championships, right? That's the question.
They have to carry a certain amount of salary. They can't bottom out their salary.
But they would never do that because the fan base is so...
It's a choice to operate at the bottom of the league payroll rise, especially because we are a revenue-sharing league. Major League Baseball is a revenue-sharing league with revenues, as you said, ratings are through the roof, revenue sharing to the payees or to the recipients of revenue sharing. I don't want to say they start $300 million in the black, but that's what the figures are outwardly and publicly in terms of revenue that they receive from the rest of the league and the collective TV deals. The Marlins fall into that category.
Those are two different things. Revenue sharing and the
TV rents
and the money from Central Baseball are two different
things.
But
you receive both.
But when you add them together,
right? Like every team receives a collective pool of money from revenue sharing itself, pure revenue sharing, as well as the TV sharing.
Their cut of the national money.
The Marlins are in that group.
Oh God, yeah.
So they're like,
and
that's
it's the
to me
biggest
where
line
there's
item.
that to me is where operating payroll-wise at the bottom feels like a choice because you are being semi-subsidized. So then we start talking, we get into the deeper layers of the deal, which is how much debt did you take on to acquire the club even, right? So that you're really debt servicing while with your revenue sharing money to then also operate at the bottom of the payroll. That to me feels inconsistent with first the market that we're in and the degrees at which you operate. You said Juan Soto, drop Juan Soto into any mix. Does he move the needle all the way? No, but like that's the extreme end of it. There are 3 one-year deals, 2-year deals, 3-year deals, middle-tier deals that in complement with a good system, a good base of young players. You can't tell me a few strategic placements of those type of moves either at the deadline or in the offseason and free agency, which we can get to because they're 2 different things. You can acquire players via trade or free agency. Trade has been more effective for the Marlins, I think, even more recently, but I really contest that you need to like run it all the way at the bottom, regardless of what your gate, your ticket, your revenue, your concessions, all that. I contest that because so many teams operate in the middle of that. The outlier group is that bottom group by pretty wide margin.
Oh, well, that's for sure. I mean, there's a lot there and some that I don't want to comment on. Sure. But
we have editing power.
No. We don't edit that out because I'm just not going to comment. But I think the Marlins ownership's argument would be in future years, they won't be where they are today. And you're making commentary on today's situation, which I think is a fair one.
And the preceding 10 years as well.
They made a decision after 23 to get to where they are now. And I think Bruce is on record in spring training as saying, we'll make the right investments and keep the right players, right? And so will the fan base hold them to it? I guess we'll see. Yeah. I think the perception or your contention that they're making money while bottoming out on the payroll this year is erroneous.
I'm not making that argument.
All right, that's
I think
all
they're
I'm
debt
saying.
servicing with that.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that, but I'm just saying like they are, and part of it is because the revenues might be down because of where the product's perception might have been. And by the way, ticket sales have been up. I still care enough to keep looking after, which is a sickness, but to keep looking after games, and it's going in the right direction. And people like Danny are very positive about the team. They certainly play hard. They're certainly competitive. So who knows where the revenues will end up, but the projections weren't that they're sitting on this pile, no matter what they get from Central Baseball and revenue.
But your job as the chief commercial officer, I mean, baseball ops, you can kind of say, I don't worry about that. I'm just putting a team together. You got to deal with
what baseball ops says.
Right.
Yes.
You got to deal with the scorn lovers.
But they're authorized to make those decisions by ownership. That don't worry about that. Just build a sustainable winner. And I think they would tell you they're off and running on that.
But on your side, which is you have to deal with the scorn lovers. You got to deal with the fan base that has lost trust. I mean, before we even get to this, the meat of it, how many times did you hear, oh, well, they're just going to sell their players? Or why would I do this? Because at the end of the day, they're just going to sell off. Like, how much did you, in your role, having to sell to big money sponsors, to suite owners, whatever it is, get that kind of initial reaction?
Every day, multiple times a day. But I would say over time, it dissipated for sure, right? And certainly our CEO at the time helped change some of that perception. And then I think extending Sandy Alcantara helped, and 2023 with a great product that fans got behind helped. It still is out there, right? And I think the discussion internally regularly, even as far back as when our CEO, Derek, was here, was, are we apologizing or are we just trying to build new fans, right? Because at some point, and you guys would know better than I, you might have lost those people forever. I'm sure you guys have people in your lives and people that are coming to your head right now that there's nothing that the Marlins can do today that get those people back to the ballpark. They might still listen on the radio, they might still watch on television, but they're not going to spend $1. They don't believe anything's going to change. And, it timed nicely with the migration here, unfortunately due to COVID, but with so many new, young, and again, Adrian, you're a new dad, so you're starting to see it. Danny, with your kids, how many families play baseball with or are in school that just got here, right? And so it was always a calculus of how much do we continue to apologize versus how much do we try to market to a new fan that actually doesn't care about any of the scorn stuff that you're talking about. But to suggest it isn't real would be not fair. Super real, and I think even worse, or more magnified is some of the things we're talking about now, decisions that might have been made in the last year or two that might be the right baseball decisions, and maybe they're panning out now, aren't acceptable because of the history. But in other markets, it might be acceptable without the history, right? That's the juxtaposition is, okay, these are the right baseball decisions, but can the revenues, club afford it, or is it just going to be, here we go again?
Well, I could speak for my son, who's a new fan. Last year, he wanted to get a Marlins jersey. He was wearing Mookie Betts jersey to the game. And he's a Marlins fan. I remember you made a joke like, hey, you got to get him a Marlins jersey. And I was like, which one do I get him? And I wasn't being a jerk about it.
That's the hard part.
I was really trying to figure it out. And then we were at the game on Friday where Stowers hit the walk-off home run to the upper deck. He looked at the Stowers jersey. He goes, I'm going to buy that jersey. I can finally get a jersey because I don't think we're going to trade this guy because he knows enough about contracts and prospects already, and he's 10, like learning lessons that he probably shouldn't have to learn at a young age, I guess. But that was his comment. It struck me like, man, like that jersey thing. That's a real thing with fans. Is that something that kind of comes into your mind in your job where you're dealing with fans?
Yeah, look, you're just trying to build affinity. You know my son well, and our sons our disclosure, my son and Danny's son have played baseball together for 6-7 years, a lot of the same kids. People root for players more than they do teams, right? And so you can have a competitive team, but if their favorite player isn't there anymore, these are 9-year-olds, right? I'll put my son on blast. You can't be a bigger front runner. He wears an SGA jersey. He wears an Ohtani jersey. Yep. Travis Kelce is his favorite football player. Right?
Caitlin Clark.
For Caitlin Clark, he's a huge Caitlin Clark fan, which I actually really support. The other three I don't support as much. But it's hard, right? And it's no. Hey, the Marlins are 5 games under 500, and they were projected to be worse. You got to get on board. That's a tough sell to a 9-year-old, right?
Yeah, and then I think the Jazz Chisholm stuff kind of put that into an interesting, a context, right? Because this is one of the more electric players outwardly in baseball, regardless of where you think is he the best player, where is he his quality? He had that thing, that magnetism to kids, and like that didn't really bump the needle in some way.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Like nudged it. Jose Fernandez was an interesting, also test case in a previous regime, previous era where it bumped the needle.
But he
did
move the needle.
He did.
Yeah,
the numbers will show Jose moved the needle.
Right.
Sandy didn't move the needle in his Cy Young year. And as much as I agree with your points on Jazz, and again, my son's favorite player, a charismatic, magnetic kid. He's played great in New York, and I think he's really embraced that spotlight. So credit to him, and he's got the right people around him. His agent does a great job. But if the Marlins weren't winning, I don't know that fans were necessarily coming to see Jazz, which is actually counter to what I just said, which is now they're winning without stars. And that's ultimately the conundrum that we found ourselves in, right? But there's an affinity with growing up and knowing the guys, right? My son had a Jazz jersey when he was 5, then at 6, right? And there's some continuity that I think players maintain, and I hope that Eli gets that experience with Kyle, who by all accounts is a great guy too, and certainly performing well. I
think you have to do both, basically. You have to grow stars,
right,
and you have to win. You can't just grow stars, not win, and be expecting to do well as a franchise. But you can also, I think the Rays see the other side of it, where they do well, still don't sell in the postseason,
right,
and are having to sell where they are. And that's been a remarkably successful winning percentage team, but they didn't do the both part.
Well, the business side hasn't supported it, and so the jury's out on why. Right. But I would argue it's hard. Even if you keep winning, and to be fair, they've only won one World Series in the COVID year, so they've won at a great winning percentage clip, but not at the top level. But again, I'm sure many teams would sign up for that. But the business hasn't supported it, right? Because Glass now, Arozarena, they get moved out, and they do a great job identifying talent.
They do scouting and development for them is really strong.
Yeah, really strong.
But Jazz, if I were to go to the old cynical Cuban Marlins fan, the people you deal with,
dealt with.
And you said, hey, Jazz, man, unbelievable player. Man, we got this Bahamian man. He's really hitting these beautiful home runs. He's fast. He can play infield. He can play outfield. Oh, yeah, talk to me when he gets traded to the Yankees and makes an all-star team.
And then that's what happens. But I thought you were going to go even further. His style wasn't really for the old Cuban fan, so I think that was another part of it.
So you're making the point that I wanted to arrive at is the lapsed fan versus the new fan. Jazz proved you can acquire the new fan with your sons. Right? So there was an ability to attract the new fan, which you're definitely targeting. But I think where they missed the ball a little bit, and they is a large, there's a lot of, it's a nuanced answer. But I think the non-acknowledgement of the scorn, like where you got all the scorn, the lapsed fan, is an interesting, because it's a large population of people who are very emotionally attached to the organization, whether people know it or not. So like I now, and this entire group is kind of organized around Marlins memorabilia. We all grew up with the teal and black Marlins stuff. Like that's what it's like worked into the fabric of how we grew up. And a large percentage of those are what Danny says, like, nah, like I can't follow them seriously, I can't. And I think that it's almost like a seemingly intentional pivot away from that whole era of like the thing you grew up with that lost you those fans, and then they're just kind of hold you at a distance.
I'm going to dispute that. I'm going to dispute that hard, but let's just put a pause so I can text my 130 that I'm not going to make it. Do I just start talking about my answer?
Yeah, you're basically, you can argue why the Laps fans shouldn't even be acknowledged. The teal and black shouldn't even be acknowledged.
Oh, right. Okay. So, first of all, just like I trust you when you tell me what goes on in the ops rooms that I wasn't in, this has been discussed in meeting rooms on the business side forever. So a couple things. Not only I don't think, there's proof that it's not as easy as you guys are saying. So I would say, first of all, we tried for years to apologize and get those fans back when Derek and I and others first got here, and it was a no-go. So I'm of the belief, right or wrong, there's almost nothing that's going to get those folks back until you start winning multiple championships. And I think Danny's story just corroborated that, because until you start keeping your players and winning significantly, those folks aren't going to believe it's any different. And unfortunately, while it might have been the right baseball decision, and let's be fair, this Agustin Ramirez has been great, I don't think any of the people that you're talking about when you talk about Jazz who say, oh, talk to me when they trade him to the Yankees, then say, but this Ramirez has been great, right? Because they traded Jazz to the Yankees, and there you go. That's what we're talking about. So I don't know that I buy those people are ever going to come back. But I think my larger contention, and this Danny and I have argued about off air, and it's ironic that you bring it up, Adrian, but again, you know this, and it was something we would talk about in the halls all the time, and shout out to Chief Marketing Officer Tiago Pinto. I heard they hear is history, history, history. So the Marlins wore teal on Friday nights, I think 2 years ago, no different than the Friday previous, than the year over year attendance Friday previous. The Marlins
attendance is the only marker here.
Yeah, or
I'm curious. It can't be the only marker.
Well,
right? Like aesthetically, like that has to matter. That has to have value.
How aren't you going to measure if it brought the fan back?
That's a good question. It's a good, but the argument that like we teased it out for 2 games and then it didn't work.
They wore it every Friday.
And it didn't make a market difference in the overall.
Now it's a higher selling jersey, but whether it's worn on Fridays or not,
the day-to-day attendance
because of the history. And by the way,
it looks better. I think,
as you guys know, it shows up in rap videos.
That's what I'm saying. It looks better.
The apology doesn't matter, is what you're saying. Acknowledge and apologize. Like even the acknowledgement doesn't move the needle back into them coming back.
It doesn't.
That's a fair argument.
It doesn't move the needle. But I'm going to go even further. You know, again, I won't get into right decisions, wrong decisions, what happened, because I don't know. But we very publicly brought Jeff Conine back into the organization's fold, I don't know, 2 years ago. Mr. Marlin, as nice a guy as you get, he'll talk to everybody. The fans love him. Didn't change the business. So, this year, to their credit, I'm not part of it, but they've retired 4 or they've added people, either Hall of Fame or numbers, Conine, Jim Leland, Jack McKeon, and Luis Castillo. I don't know if that changes the attendance on a Sunday. You know what changes the attendance? The opponent that they're playing, and that's where we are. And so we can talk about that separately, but I think the organization has done a ton of stuff in the 7 seasons that I was there to try to hearken back to the history, and I think you guys who are nostalgic for the history think that it is a quick fix, and the empirical revenue data would suggest otherwise. Now, I was part of the design team that created this new City Connect 2.0. That's an homage to the old, it's the pink and the teal together, What's your opinion on that?
I like it. My son likes it.
I think from a design and from an artistic standpoint.
Well, you're also an artist. So
again, aesthetic and like things that are timeless matter. And I think that for whatever reason, they found that teal and black combination at a time when nobody else had it. It's clear. The timeline has borne this out that it's just survived. Style changes, culture changes. It's a clean aesthetic
part of culture. It doesn't make people go to games.
I'm not saying it does, but I'm arguing that can't be the only driver. That can't be the only marker.
I don't know what other marker it would be.
Right. So like the people who want to be nostalgic about the thing that they grew up with.
Well, let me ask you a question. Were you aware that City Connect 2.0 put the new with the past? Did you know that there was a teal and pink connection there? Were you aware of that narrative?
I'm not aware of that narrative. No.
Danny?
And
I'm colorblind. I didn't. I liked it though.
By the way, as am I. I'm not talking about from an aesthetic visual.
Yeah, no. I didn't know the backstory.
Was it marketed to you in a way that you knew that was a hat tip to the nostalgia that you're looking for?
I mean, I think it's funny because we're talking about...
The answer is no.
No. But
right. I would argue that's a challenge.
I see.
Because, and again, I'm not being critical. I don't know what decisions were made. I haven't been there since March. But that jersey was designed fully with the intention of putting the new, which we would call today's Miami, the pink, sort of the Inter Miami, the Heat's look, with the old teal. And if you look, some of the pinstripes and lines that go horizontal and vertical are pink into teal and teal into pink. And so that was part of it, again, because, and Adrian, I think you know this, you can only wear 5 uniforms during a season. And so if you're going to bring out City Connect 2.0, can you continue to wear the teals on Friday? This year they weren't going to wear the teals on Friday. So this was a way to keep the nod to the history. And so if that message didn't cut through, then that's, I think, a fair discussion or opportunity for the organization, because that was part of the intent of that drawing.
I think fans, they don't necessarily want history, because we just spent half an hour talking about how the history is something you're fighting, right? So what they really want is to rewrite history. They want to be the teal and black team that kept their players like the Houston Astros and went that way. Literally an alternate history of what actually happened with the Marlins, but if it worked out right. It's like, again, it's relationships. It's like, hey, I wish and I thankfully didn't go through this, but I imagine it's like if your dad left, you're like, hey, I wish it worked out with my dad and it went this way, or if my wife, I wish I didn't do this and it worked out this way. You're rewriting, you're nostalgic, but you're rewriting history.
But can I play
different
devil's
than it came
advocate?
out.
Just ironic that I'm going to defend everybody. I mean, obviously there were times that I was in these meetings. You talk about the old fan who says, oh, look, there they go again with Jazz. And I pointed out that this Ramirez has played well, so maybe it was the right decision. But also, that was part of the calculus in extending Sandy, is look, we are going to keep the right players, right? And he certainly won a Cy Young. It hasn't panned out this year. And as Adrian knows, one of the nicest guys in baseball, so everybody should be rooting for him. But do they get credit for that, right? We're immediately talking about Jazz to the Yankees, and here we go again. But they extended Sandy and did it on a fair deal for both sides, bought him out of arbitration years, probably cheaper than his free agent years would be. But that was like, nobody talks about that anymore. And maybe that's because he had Tommy John and has had a tough year, and that would be a little bit more salient had he been around more. But you talk about the history, that move, not only did it make financial sense and is he a horse, but that was a little bit of a, oh no, things are different now.
No, and what's interesting there you said is like, because I feel similarly. I feel to a certain degree protective of the people whose efforts were squarely in the direction of like paying homage, like hat tipping to the history. But I think what you're saying is like the reward isn't there. Like even if we give you what you want, this tip to your nostalgia, that doesn't mean we get you back.
That is it.
But that is our feedback, or that is the fans' feedback of how to get you back.
Right.
So
but that's the hard part.
Yeah, it is the hard. I can
guys,
see it.
And Danny and I have argued about this at many a Little League game. Teal. When we went with teal, it didn't move the needle.
I'll dispute that.
Now your argument could be 13 games every Friday, not long enough.
Sure.
Is one season enough? It should be part of everything they do. And by the way, you might be right. But I think there's other ways to do it. To their credit, this year they rolled out this Hall of Fame, which are 4 guys that are from the historical part of the team, right? So it's not just teal and black. It's the championship banners, right? We had heard, and this goes back to when I was there was no place to represent the championships. And so those banners got bigger, right? And so I don't think that there's any disputing that the history hadn't been celebrated in the right way. I would contend that just celebrating the history with the 70 and 92 team, if that's what it's going to be, doesn't change anything, which then leads to the next question is we would hear all the time, well, you should just sign 26 Venezuelans. Look at the WBC. Or just sign 26 Cubans. Look at the WBC, right? And I think that's way too simple. I think if you went 70 and 92 with 26 Venezuelans, I still don't think people would really care. And I think if you went 92 and 70 with 26 Oxfelds, I think people would care. I think on the margins, having more Hispanic players, Latin players helps because people, see clearly culture wants to be celebrated. And, I think we should say one thing that goes gangbusters there are the Heritage Nights because clearly, but that's another way to talk about this same art or discussion. The Venezuelan Heritage Night will sell 27,000 tickets. Almost none of those people come to a second game.
Yeah, it'd be nice if you re-signed, and this is before your time, but you had the best Venezuelan player in the history of the sport.
Right.
And you traded him for Cameron Maven.
But I'm just saying, let's stick on that.
Yeah.
They'll all come out to celebrate Venezuelan history, or Venezuelan heritage, I should say, and it's a great night, and the ballpark feels wonderful. You guys have been there. There's energy, and so it's not a retention thing. Did I have a good time? There's no doubt people had a good time. But for whatever reason, they don't really come back that second or third times, right? And I think that's a large challenge. Again, I'm not oversharing, and I don't know what the numbers are this year. Clearly, I've not been part of that. But our head of analytics, Christian Lowe, used to say things like, a single game ticket buyer comes to 1.3 games a year. If you can get that single game ticket buyer to come to 2.3 games a year, it materially changes your business. So think about that, right? You have your groups, you have your members, and then you have single game ticket buyers, which is the majority of who's coming to games. They average 1.3 games a year.
Yeah.
So that means I'm a person who's buying a single game ticket. I don't come to more than 1 game a year.
I'm so
What's
glad
the league
we
average on that, by the way?
Oh, I don't. It's got to be higher than that.
I'm glad we arrived here because I think this is an area where I think people don't realize how many efforts have been made to improve it. But you go to any stadium and the ingress, egress, as well as experience once you are just outside the stadium, Miami seems unique in that it's just not. For all sorts of complicated political reasons, financial reasons, it is not the most welcoming place to want to come back. You get off 8:30. You've been to countless games. You're trying to get there at the hours where you're rushing to get to the game. Just to get there, you get off the exit, and it's another 30 minutes just to get to your parking spot. To then
drawbridges.
So I'll say a couple things there. First of all, that's aspirationally that's every game. In reality, that's a handful of games that scale from that size. So I think the majority of games still are easier to get to, but the ones that are popular and sell well, that's certainly a challenge.
Which is it's where you hope you want to be, right?
Aspirationally, you hope you're there.
And the events really puts that into it magnifies that component of it.
All I can tell you is I hear what you're saying. It was something we discussed and talked about every day, and they are doing everything they can to make that better, as you know.
That's the part I do know, and that's where I feel like
logistical challenges. I can only speak for stuff that I worked on because I'm comfortable sharing that. The bane of my existence was the drawbridge. The drawbridge and the fact that it would go up and we could do everything right. We could have the right Venezuelan throwing out the first pitch.
Right.
We could have the right post-game. That was, for whatever reason, we all get things that are just like your white elephants or your beat. And these guys will tell you that if you're there, Anthony Favado, who was I was his right hand on all this stuff, as good a guy as you'll find and as good at his job as you'll find. That was my thing. How can we do everything right but these drawbridges? So I finally, after 90 times around, I got to the Coast Guard. And it turned out that there actually are, if I remember correctly, it needs to stay down from bachelor party boats at game times. The only time it goes up is when tugs are drawing big boats through it. Unfortunately, tugs draw big boats through it at all times.
Right.
And so, you look back and it's like, it feels like it was 40 games, but it was really only 11 games. So we did get to a point where at games that we projected 30,000 or more, I could write an email for a temporary exemption from tugs going down. And so we did that on opening day. We did that for Savannah Bananas and other stuff.
Right.
But the irony is, and again, this is the kind of thing you just can't make up. You guys might remember not 25 because I wasn't part of it, but 24 opening day, we played the Rays. It went to extra innings. You have to put a time period on when the tug can't come through. So it's okay, we have the new rules. It's gonna be 2.5 hours. Egress is gonna be an hour. So 3:30 after first pitch, that's how long we don't want it to come through. The game went 4 hours, and within 12 minutes of last out, the bridge went up. And it wasn't their fault, it was because the exemption expired. But I can tell you, those kinds of things where they can make or do work, they're doing all they can.
I believe that for sure.
And the free flow parking, they made a change this year in parking. I haven't been to a game, so I don't know exactly what it is, but Anthony walked me through it. That was part of the friction getting in, but ultimately, you said it, there's no public transportation, which is something I know everyone's been working on. And
no easy fix to that.
No easy fix.
And the Marlins can't fix it themselves, even if they wanted to.
There's no fix.
Which is the case in a lot of it. They can't even fix the thing they want to fix.
Right.
With
which
the
is
intention.
a challenge.
And
then, the Marlins announced, and I don't know where this project sits today. I'm sure it will happen. Have I been supposed to look at that? I've been looking at
it. You're good.
Look wherever you want.
They announced the live district on the West Plaza that will help with that because people will come earlier, stay later. And one of the issues you have is everybody comes at the same time, everybody leaves at the same time because there's not enough to do in the area, right? And that's not on the Marlins only. That's on, that area hasn't redeveloped the same way maybe Wynwood or Edgewater or Midtown have. And I think that's part of the long-term plan for the city. But and I think, Adrian, you said it fairly, there's a number of factors that all converge to make that so challenging. But that is a giant focus for everybody in that building.
Right. And the way the stadium deal comes together is relevant here because I think the area and the immediate community is also scorned and positioned to not grant easily the things that any other businesses around the stadium, tenants, all sorts of things.
The history certainly plays. The history certainly plays there. And I think, again, Alfie's done a phenomenal job building relationships with the different politicians that matter there. But you're right. A professional baseball team in the majority, if not all 29 other markets, would have an easier time getting support from the surrounding community than maybe the Marlins have. That goes back to Danny's point of the way the stadium was built, how it passed, all of the things that predate new ownership, which is ultimately the point. The fan doesn't really look at new ownership, old ownership. It just is what it is. We're in the business. We're a little bit more sort of sports business savvy maybe than an average fan would be. Right. So we look at it by ownership groups. But, most places don't, or most fans, most decision makers don't necessarily separate it out that way.
Let me ask you, because while you're on this energy, what's something that the fan doesn't understand about either your job, your group's job, the Marlins organization? What's something you hear that you're like, man, I keep hearing this and it's so wrong, or you just don't understand X, Y, Z?
Well, we've talked about two of them. Why don't they wear teal more? Why is it easier to get to the game? I would say one of the other things that really always, again, can be something that sets me off, and you both are aware that I can get set off. Why don't you have more concerts? Right? That you just raise your hand and you say, hi, can I have a concert? And, Jay-Z or somebody say, yep, sure, I'm right here, right? There's a lot that goes into the concerts, and that's a business that I, again, was intimately familiar with, working on with Anthony Favada and him explaining a lot of it to me, educating me over time, and then us educating Bruce and the other owners, right? Because, and you guys see it, there aren't a ton of baseball stadiums that have concerts, right? The ones that do have concerts, they're generally in markets that are a little bit more supportive of concerts or historical stadiums. Wrigley, Fenway, Yankee Stadium, even Citizens Bank, Citi Field. An artist needs to travel with the appropriate sized stage. You can't take an arena stage and dump it into a baseball stadium. You can't take a football stage and dump it into a baseball stadium. So those are two easy, to understand issues. Number three, just the simple cost structure of putting on a show at the ballpark is much more exorbitant for the artist than the arena. Now, you'll argue, okay, but they have 37,000 seats versus 18,000 seats, so the revenue's different, and I think that's a fair argument, but the ratio is off. What it costs to put on, right, because the artist or the promoter is going to pay for putting on the show. The cost to put on that show in a ballpark is so much bigger. You got to cover the floor, right? So there's all of these things. And then lastly, we live in a market, fortunately, because they do a great job also, where Hard Rock Live is. I don't know if you guys have been up to concerts there. Yeah. The Guitar Hotel is a lovely facility. Their leadership are great people. I know them all well. They've done a great job. So by no means am I besmirching them. But they're actually the biggest competitor, right? Because so look, Taylor Swift is going to play 61,000 seats at Hard Rock and 4 times. That she's not even a consideration for a 37,000 person stadium. But there are some that are. They go play Hard Rock Live because the expenses are nothing. They just come out on a stage if you've been there. Maybe there's a band, and they charge large enough money from a ticket perspective that the revenues are the same. Think about that. 7,500 seats generates the same revenue that 37,000 seats has. Yeah. So if you're an artist,
it's clear business.
Yep.
Right. So what? Right. So those are all challenges. Now, hat tip to the ownership, and I think we've talked about this. They put down synthetic turf for a number of reasons, but one of which is to make it more amenable for concerts.
Yeah, I live the other side of that. On the baseball side,
right.
Your outfielders are standing in just some chopped up grass.
Yeah, like, but it's still better for the players'
Monster.
knees.
I remember post Monster Jam was one of them where it's like,
but so
that was a necessary move in order for this to even be more feasible.
So the synthetic turf, they've invested in their own flooring. So one of the things people don't understand is even with turf, you still got to cover the field because the trucks or the concert stage could potentially ruin it. But that used to have to be a line item that you charge the artist. The Marlins own their own flooring now, so you got to pay for the labor to put the flooring down. But the Marlins own their own flooring. You guys have seen the LED lights, which artists can plug into from a lighting perspective. They did a sound study. The acoustics haven't been great. The sound study's been done. The acoustics are better. So they've put a lot of resource into making it more viable for concerts. But I'd say that's the one thing to bring, it's a lot of background. That plus the teal and why don't you get the new or the old fans back? I think those are my 2 things. Plus, why isn't it easier to get into the ballpark? Plus concerts. I think you've hit my 4 things.
Well, I got a 5th one. Explain, and I think I might know the answer in this one, but me as a South Florida guy, I like being outside in the summer. It's not a big deal to me.
Yeah.
But keeping that roof open more often, what was the analytics or the feedback you guys got as far as the decisions on the roof?
Yeah, and I'll probably throw some of that to Adrian. It's a great question. I love the roof open. Remember, I grew up going to Shea Stadium, Yankee Stadium, Citi Field, Yankee Stadium. You don't have a choice when you go there. That's the way baseball should be played. That's a little bit of a different heat in the summer than here, but also people are accustomed to it being closed. And so you have this challenge of people actually would prefer it to be closed. I think you and I are actually in the minority in what do people want. I think the owners would prefer for it to be open more often. Now from a revenue perspective, and I don't think the revenue changes really one way or the other, air conditioning, more drinks, sunscreen. I think those are all a wash. I think it just the building feels better, and I think that the baseball feels more real when it's open. I think, there might still be a certain level of heat index, a certain level of wind. One consideration is it is still a machine. The building is 14, 15 years old. The roof can get stuck over a certain wind. And so if there's any wind in the area, I think you have to play closed because you can't risk the roof getting stuck, right? And then there's a baseball discussion, right?
Yes, there is.
I know Donnie and Skip preferred certain things. Are you a pitcher's team? If you're a pitching team, then the ball travels better when it's open, I believe, so you want to keep it closed. I think there's some decisions like that. And then you had the players griping. So last year, it was beautiful. Last year being 24, it was beautiful all of April. The Marlins started, unfortunately, 1-12, 1-13, whatever it was. I think 0-6 at home to start, Tampa, and then maybe Pittsburgh. And Jazz is saying things like, oh, well, yeah, the roof's open, so none of us can see the ball. Meanwhile, the other team is also hitting with the roof open, but there was a lot of noise from the players about the roof being open. So I think all of those are calculus.
I'm so glad you brought that baseball component up because it's twofold. It's like, how does How does the front office evaluate the baseball scenario? And you always kind of use Coors Field as a marker, and you'll use Wrigley, like, and how do balls travel in these different places? For whatever reason, and it's an accumulation of things, it is not a friendly place to hit. And like any visiting ball player tells you the same thing, they only have to be there for a certain pocket of time. But where you really see it is when guys are here for a long amount of time and they play here and they know this feels like an out here versus like a ball in the seats in another park. But the humidor was attempted, balls being in the humidor, closed, open, can never get to anything truly conclusive. Walls moving in doesn't really move the needle the way you think it does.
Which has happened 3 times in the ballpark's history.
But what I will say that the hitters they get domed up when they come here. They get like this feeling that the ball doesn't travel.
It's a mental thing.
And especially if you're in it as your home park. I remember watching Adam Duvall struggle with this one, like him knowing he's played for all these other teams and knowing he's a power-driven dude. And he's like, man, I'm squaring this up. And I know that that's a homer in all these other parks. I don't care what the stats say. I know it.
But the irony in that example is he wants it open. Jazz and others last year were vocal about
the other direction.
It's open, so we're losing. Meanwhile, the other team is winning when it's open. Yeah, now, maybe they're used to playing more open. That always was hard for me too, because you play 35 spring training games at 1 o'clock in the afternoon outdoors.
Yeah. No, and I think I don't know, you do the autopsy of that whole study and multiple layers of it, and you come out with like an inconclusive, like I can't tell where we stand on this. So I think it's nice every now and then, but I do think you're right. I think people are expecting it to be a seed closed. It does give it a little more of like a clinical feel in there as opposed to this open air
it's much
component.
Worse. And listen, let's be fair. The crowds aren't always huge. I think the building feels better with a smaller crowd with the roof open. I just think it feels more like baseball also as a purist. But it's hard. And then, by the way, then you have things like the Caribbean series where it needs to be it needs to be played the same way for every game because you need consistency. So then it's closed the whole time. I believe that was the same for the WBC, which becomes a concern, right? I think internally we wanted to push it open because it just, if you're getting people in February and March to come to games, it feels better in, open, especially that time of year, right? But then again, the other consideration, I hit on it, but maybe not hard enough, is the reason it was built with the roof is because of all the rain delays you guys endured, no batting practices at Joe Robbie or Land Sharks or whatever it was called.
You need one.
And people think you can just snap your fingers and close it. You can't. It takes 13 minutes to close, and if the wind is over 25 miles per hour, it's going to get stuck. So if you play open, even in a July day, and then all of a sudden the rain comes, you don't want to be the team that had a rain delay with a roof, right? So you
can't audible quick enough.
Yeah, so you defer to keeping it closed. I remember one time early on when we decided to close it in the middle of a game, and I remember standing next to Derek and our president at the time, Chip, watching it close, and everybody just being paranoid it was going to get stuck as the game was happening. This must have been 2018 or 19, early 19 maybe, and they made the decision, and it goes that high. It's the CEO, it's the president, it's certainly the general manager, president of baseball operations, but it starts with the manager. What does the manager prefer? Who's pitching? And then, ultimately, you need someone who's on top of both because maybe baseball wants it open, business or closed, baseball wants it open. Who's going to rule the roost? I think more often than not, that'll be baseball because ultimately wins and losses are what drive it.
Let me ask you, you mentioned a director of analytics, not for baseball, but for your side of the ledger, which I didn't know that existed. I mean, you hear about those things, but it's interesting. What was something that either from the analytics side or just in general that you learned about the fan base, the operation here in Miami, that you were like, that's different than I expected it to be?
Well, first of all, they do a really nice job and are leaning even more into it now. I know that there's been a number of hires even just in the last couple of months on the ticket sales side, on the marketing side, that are really leaning into the data from a marketing perspective. Not that we weren't already, but I think leaning even further into it. And as an 8-year now Miamian, I don't know that it surprises me today, but I think it's hard to overstate how late a buying market this is. And I assume as two Miamians, you understand it.
That tracks.
Yeah, but they've done a lot of work with all right, we're going to promote this game 14, 10, 8, and 2 days out. And it's like, you know what? Even if you just go to 8 and 2, there's almost no difference. Even, right? And that's always an internal discussion because then remember, and this comes back to some of the business that I oversaw, you have some sponsor commitments. So it's like, well, why are we going to spend the marketing dollars or I'd rather spend them on something else than promoting this game 2 weeks out when we know no matter what, people are only going to buy it 3 days before. But I'm a sponsor of Venezuelan Heritage and I'm Santa Teresa's, right, which is a Venezuelan rum, and they're supposed to get the exposure for a month of promoting it. So then that becomes a discussion of, are we just doing it to give Santa Teresa the exposure, but it's actually not going to sell any tickets? And, I think you ask about the analytics department, Christian Lowe, Chris Craven, they do a great job, but they're now used to it. I don't know that they raised the flag or the red flag as early as maybe they did 5 years ago, because it's been a continual thing that there's almost no way to change. The only thing that is an outlier to that is Flanagan's night. But that's partially because Flanagan's, I think, sells the tickets in their own place. But Flanagan night sells early, tracks, regularly. But that was always, the scary part, but also the fun part. You're trying to sell out opening day. The tickets go on sale 2 months out you're watching, a month out you're watching, 20 days out you're watching. And even for, holiday packs and BOGO offers and all the things that we've done over the years, you try to compare it year over year to see how the fan base is reacting. It's not always that easy because you spend more marketing dollars, less marketing dollars. What channels are you using, right? So you need to make sure that all of these things are the same to really extrapolate. But there were things we did, 21, 22, 23. I talked earlier about focusing on new buyers that, you would put a pack up maybe between Thanksgiving and Black Friday. I guess Thanksgiving is Black Friday. So maybe November, December time period, and you would see the percentage of buyers being new buyers, and that would really excite you, right? So maybe you sold X amount, but 70% had never been to a Marlins game before, and that would really get you excited.
Interesting. So you mentioned the WBC, and I've been wanting to get to the World Baseball Classic because I am wondering what that's like being on the receiving end of okay, now Major League Baseball comes in and they run the World Baseball Classic, but they have to collaborate and partner with the receiving entity and stadium, and especially LoanDepot that became, they host the final and they host that other, I think the most exciting rounds and pool of it, I think is what happens there. So it's
hard to say anything was more exciting than Ohtani striking out Trout.
Right, that was electric.
But in general, the pool rounds might be more exciting just from a Venezuela
matchup standpoint. Yeah. So what is I know that's asking a big question, but big picture, what's that like, and how do you expect it to change or grow into this next one? Because we're positioning ourselves, I think, to be talking about global baseball in the lead up to the World Baseball Classic, so that when it comes around again, we've been in this rhythm of talking about global baseball, because I think the World Baseball Classic shows you how global baseball truly is.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, and that's a loaded question. First of all, as cool and fun an event to be part of, and I'd say the same thing about the Caribbean Series. I don't know if you guys got to that. Obviously, different. You're not I guess you are representing your country, but you're representing your country from a club perspective versus actual flag, and fewer MLB stars. So I think it doesn't resonate maybe mainstream, the Caribbean Series, as much as but it got your old Marlins fan to come back to the ballpark maybe for that, because
crazy
they have
fans too in the
affinity
crowd
with Licey or one of those particular teams. I think I was always shocked with how those teams and where people grew up resonated from a club perspective. But yeah, the World Baseball Classic is a phenomenal event. Their team is led by a guy named Jim Small, who used to run international baseball, and now he runs international baseball's business from a WBC perspective, as collaborative and as good a guy to work with as you'll get. So to Adrian's point, sure, baseball takes it over, but it feels like it's really, and it really is a co-pro in a lot of different ways, but they're super collaborative. Also, hat tip again to Anthony Favada, who every time it comes through puts together a binder this big, even though we just over-delivered on the series in 23 for 15 games, and his predecessor, Claude Delhomme, who, there's a lot of history with how you have to present to the league, and they've never cut shortcuts on that, and have always made it like we didn't have it in the bag. So I think that there's a lot to be said for that. But it's a wonderful event. For the Marlins, you try to leverage it to drive Marlins membership. And I think, Danny, you're on the other side of that. And I don't know what they've done for the 26 one, but
I'm set up to buy,
certain seats and certain access you can only get if you're a Marlins member. And to baseball's credit, or MLB's credit, even, they understand that the home team is going to use it for that. But at what point do singles go on sale? So that's a whole collaborative process. But I think more macro, what you're trying to do is, as we've said, it's a ballpark that can scale and scales well. And the Marlins have a great fan base, but they're not always there. And there's a lot of folks who haven't been there yet. You're hoping that people come to the WBC, come to the Caribbean Series and say, wow, that was awesome. I'm going to come again, right? And so that's really, in addition to the money that you make from putting on the event, which was significant. So let's not lose sight of that. But the flip is you're also taxing your staff significantly in March, 2 weeks before opening day and, across the board. But I still think as a business side guy, it was worth it. But you're really hoping that it creates an affinity for either the Marlins or for LoanDepot Park in a way that maybe hasn't been there historically because of the memories created there, because it's a generational thing. I might not care about the Marlins, but I'm Venezuelan, so I'm going to come to that game, a grandfather and an abuelo with a son and a grandson, and now they're going to come back to Marlins games. Unfortunately, we didn't see a lot of that in 23. I hope that these guys do see a lot of that in 26. I think one of the problems, I don't want to say problems, I think the jury's still out. It was just one 15-game run. But if you come to 4 games in the WBC, March 12th, 14th, 16th, and 18th, are you ready to come to baseball again April 1st? That's the question, right? Is that even if you created those memories and people had this wonderful experience from a financial perspective, a disposable income perspective, whatever it is it too soon to expect them to then come back in April, May to a Marlins?
Let me ask you this, taking away from the step back from the Marlins side of it. Now just David Oxfeld, sports business guy. You saw from the inside and outside the WBC, but you were not obviously working for Major League Baseball. You were working for a club. Seeing the event, seeing the excitement, what you were able to get away with charging, seeing all that from more of an insider perspective than someone like me, how big can this event get just from a revenue standpoint, from an interest standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think 26 will tell a lot about that. A couple things. In 23, remember, the tournament hadn't been back since 17, because I believe it was supposed to happen in 21, and then COVID happened, and then the lockout happened, or strike, I guess it was lockout. So 6 years between the tournament. So I believe there's a school of thought, I'm not saying I subscribe to it, that was lightning in a bottle because it hadn't happened in 6 years. Plus, you had major league player buy-in in 23 in a way that they never had in 17 and previous to that. I mean, Derek was always in it. I think Trout was in it. You had stars, but I think the level of participation in 23 was different. So I do think that there's a school of thought that temper 26 expectations because 23 was lightning in a bottle. I also will say, again, having been there, because of the 6-year gap, MLB was very particular about making sure that we sold every ticket. So you talk about the analytics department. I think Christian would tell you postscript, we sacrificed, and by the way, not just us, the revenue split with a number of parties, but we sacrificed on ticket price for where it could have been to ensure a sellout, which, by the way, sometimes, at least for Marlins games, I think might be the right strategy, because then you get ancillary revenues, you get people who want to come back. But you talk about how big the revenues can get. I think ticket prices were increased. You would know better than I, but I know that the plan was to increase ticket prices because the belief is some money was left on the table in 23. That combined with, was it lightning in a bottle, or does the memory of Venezuela versus Dominican and Mike Trout striking out with Shohei Ohtani, does that sustain into 26? I don't have that answer because I'm not in the meetings now and I can't tell you how it's tracking. But those are the two schools of thought. So my belief is it can only continue to get bigger. I think it was an amazing thing, but I might be biased because I was there, on the fields and close enough. And so we'll see, is the general fan excitement as significant in 23 as it was in 17. The last thing I'll say, I know that you're jonesing to get in.
No, I'm not. I'm excited about this.
I think we live in WBC Central, not just because the ballpark hosts 15, but because of 15 games, because of the cultural makeup of Miami, the diversity, the historical fan base, all of those things. I think if you go to a bar in New York City, the Knicks game is just as likely to be on as the WBC is to be on, or maybe more likely to be on than the WBC, right? I remember talking to colleagues around the country who weren't as, blown away with it as we were, but clearly the sellouts, the dollars, the experience showcase that in Miami, it is super relevant.
Yeah, I have two thoughts there. First is that from a baseball standpoint, it does feel like the reciprocation of the participation, the willingness to participate by the dudes, the stars of the game
Continued
is there.
Into 26,
and so I think 26 will benefit from what 23 did for the event overall.
Totally sit.
And I think that's
Seems
across
that
the board. It feels that way. You talk to guys from the Dominican Republic, you talk to guys from Venezuela. Sedan Rafaela just opted in to play for the Netherlands, so it's beyond just like the obvious teams. And so there you just get a higher quality product so that you can have Shohei striking out Mike Trout at the end of the game, and both of those lineups being stacked with stars from their country.
Yeah.
And
I think
so
that's a very good point.
That stands out, that like the baseball side is participating. Mike Hill was just named the general manager for Team USA. Like the people involved on the baseball side.
I think Skip's a coach too. I think
Skip is a coach, and DeRosa is the manager.
Yeah.
But the thing that I felt personally multiple times was it's where you get that, like, man, baseball can be really electric in this place. And like you can have a baseball experience that's at the highest. I would put the WBC up there. And I actually think Teoscar Hernandez said this on Mookie Betts' podcast, where he said the Dominican versus either Venezuela or the Puerto Rico matchup was like, those were more electric than the World Series games that he just participated in.
The stat that everybody used was Trey Turner's homer in the finals had more views in 6 hours than Bryce Harper's walk-off in the NLCS had in 3 months.
That's right.
Right, because remember, Bryce had a walk-off for the Phillies in October. So, I don't think that there's any doubt on that, which is why I'm in the school of thinking it's only going to continue to grow. But I've heard a counter view, which I'm not saying I agree with. But I think the 2 points that you just made, player buy-in and just the atmosphere, and it's something that I did leave out before, and I think the jury's still out on this. One of the things that I think when I was there, the Marlins did try to do was replicate that atmosphere from the WBC, from the Caribbean Series, and some of the marketing and some of the in-game stuff. I don't know that it took as well as maybe we had hoped, and so I've heard that they might be going in the other direction now. You guys go to games, Danny, so I don't know what changed.
Yeah, I talked to Tiago about this a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, he said that's what he was trying to do. He's trying to get the WBC feel in the stadium.
Okay, so then that's a good segue into the other component, because what I was getting at was like, it feels not all those people are coming from completely external to our market, and they're like, it's creating that environment. And then I'm seeing the Savannah Bananas component to this, which I'm also very curious about, because in these windows, like, those people are not traveling to Miami, maybe from Palm Beach, maybe from out of state to come in and play and to watch. That's cool. That's really cool.
We had a number of states, way more than you would have thought, attend. But your point is still the right point.
And so I guess I'm asking a similar question that I asked about the WBC, but the Savannah Bananas era that we're in seems really interesting to me, because Danny texted me from the game talking about the experience, talking about the amount of merch that they sold. I don't know what my question is, but I'm very fascinated by this entity and the fact that it could pull up and do this using baseball as the vehicle, even in a stadium or market that you're not expecting it. The MLB attendance kind of is contrasted by this event.
Yeah. So yes. A number of things. Fascinating study. Did you want to say something?
No, I'm just nodding.
They've done a great job as a marketing vehicle. Danny, I'd be curious, did you enjoy it, or were you just fascinated by it?
I mean, the kids enjoyed it. You know what I mean? The merch lines were ridiculous, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Harlem Globetrotters.
Personally, it wasn't really for me, but I don't know that I'm their audience.
Right.
But I do think that Adrian makes a great point, and it's something that we did deal with. And I should have mentioned also in the concert conversation, the perception of the MLB attendance can be a challenge in getting some of these other events, with the belief of, well, if they're not coming to that, why would they come to this? Now, I think we've shown with the WBC, the Caribbean Series, the Kanye concert, certainly with the Savannah Bananas, that can be countered. And we were really excited because at first we'd only won that October game. And then because of the delivery, and again, shout out to Anthony Favada and his team that did a phenomenal job. Because of that delivery, they then came back for March 1st and 2nd, which interestingly weren't contracted in that first run. It was because of the delivery of October 1st. And then the March 2nd game sold great. We had to do a little work to get the March 3rd game sold out, and credit to the entire building who all chipped in across multiple departments to get that game sold out. So we sold out 3 Savannah Banana games, which goes to show the popularity of the Bananas. And let's not forget, they also played in Tampa. They're also, right, so there's other places that Floridians could go, either north or west, to see them. But they've just captured on a moment. You know, so many people say, and by the way, this started well before they played with us. You'd read the New York Times article, some of the Twitter stuff, some of the TikTok stuff, and you know, I had friends that would say, hey, here's what you guys should be looking at. And it's like, I get it. It's the low-hanging fruit for like, how does a team that doesn't always resonate? There's not a ton that you can really take from it, having gone to the games. I think the biggest takeaway for me was, you know, and we were fortunate, we did like a session with Jesse Cole, who's the founder, for our staff. And, you know, these aren't necessarily recreating the wheel, but his point is everything should be fan first. 100% of your decisions should be fan first. So go back to everything we talked about. If you think the roof is better for the fan open, always play, again, and I'm being hyperbolic, but all of these decisions that we're talking about, he would say should always be fan first, which is why he tries to cut down on resale. There's no fees, all of these things, right? So every decision should be driven by fan first. If you're not failing, then you're not trying enough things, right? And I think whether it's the Marlins, I think all of us sometimes or paralysis by analysis, overthinking things, especially across 81 games. But it's going to happen because you're trying to, you know, they're so focused on how do we get people here on Monday, that happens, and how do we get people here on Tuesday, how do you get, right? So there's a cadence that I think Jesse's like, just make decisions, move, and if you fail, that's okay, try the next time, right? So I think there's some things to learn from a business practice perspective, but I don't know that like you're not going to have babies crawl on the field. You're not going to have the golden ball. You know, maybe MLB can make some changes, but I don't know that the Marlins can learn stuff. You know, I think the other thing I would say that was interesting, it dovetails with us talking about how do you replicate the WBC, which is much more Hispanic. The Savannah Bananas come and they play Bon Jovi and Metallica, right? And so, and they sold out 3 dates. And I don't know that there's a right answer, but if they sold out 3 dates, then can the Marlins get away with playing only Bon Jovi and Metallica? You know, the Savannah Bananas are playing Bad Bunny, only the one that you're going to hear on Sirius XM Hits 1. They're not going into the depths, and they're not playing Gente de Zona probably. But right, then on the Marlins side, you're going much deeper into that. And so or I guess I should say on the WBC side, you're going much deeper into that. So, and they sell out also. So where's the right answer for the Marlins to sort of find the happy medium? But really cool to be a part of. I think the folks who run the ballpark, it's one of their crowning achievements until they put ice down for the Winter Classic, or they also put a stage down. I don't know if you guys went to the Kanye concert with a stage that was on fire in a pool. So I think they've done some I think they've done some really good work in terms of how they've executed things. But yeah, I think that would be my answer. I don't know. You didn't really ask a question. I didn't really give an answer, but I think we talked about a lot of things.
I think we covered it well, and I just my overall stance. I think I'm with you. Like as a baseball guy, I kind of like I look at it and it's a little bit circus-ish for me to feel super like leaning into it. That said, 2 things. They've got lightning in a bottle. And I don't think it's just like, I think it's sustainable, but I think that they've harnessed
I was going to say, it's not going away,
it's
and
sustainable.
They're only adding more teams and more leagues and all of those things. And by the way, I should say, sorry to go back, but Danny, you said, you know, it's like the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball. That offends Jesse because of what Adrian just said. The Harlem Globetrotters never iterated. Right, so before we were born, all of us, even old me, the Harlem Globetrotters were more popular than the NBA. The Harlem Globetrotters, I don't know if they're extinct now. I think they still travel, but certainly not with the popularity because they never iterated. I think we all say, and I'm not just criticizing you, you know, it's the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball, but Jesse would contend We're not, because now we have 4 teams and every night it's a different show and the game is not scripted. You don't know who's going to win, right? That's all true. Whereas the Globetrotters, it was always the Globetrotters, right? The whole thing was the same. Sorry, it's
more theatrical. They're both theatrical, but more intentionally so. And to that point, what I do love about it, unequivocally, is that you can create these opportunities for these guys, these baseball players, to have a different kind of like parallel career or an extension of their minor league careers. Because what I see all the time, I think people see the 26 men on a major league roster, not realizing there's 162 in a minor league system, and all these guys have they get released, and sometimes they haven't finished they haven't gone to college, they've just signed from the Dominican or Venezuela. I think it's created this new like a baseball offshoot that's creating careers and opportunities. And I have to do nothing but celebrate that. Just seeing the other side of guys, super talented baseball players, that just because it's not at a major league level, kind of fall out of having a job.
It's not just baseball players. They also have to have the right personality.
For sure.
I agree with your point, although I think it's a handful, but it does give another avenue. But it's not just because you have good baseball talent. Right. They want people who are showmen.
Who are performers. As well. And I think baseball sometimes gets trapped in this antiquated, the game's got to be played the right way. You got to do, and you can't, like players when they show out or do something flashy.
The WBC shows you the opposite of that. I remember and the Caribbean Series. These guys would, single with a runner on second, and they're getting out of the dugout and high-fiving. And I was like, whoa, right? And listen, we've had internal discussions about how does the team celebrations reflect Miami in a different and better way. I think that was more during the Jazz time, right? I don't know that there's guys today necessarily would care for that. But yeah, it's certainly, when we talk about the sport, attendance, ratings, all being up, revenues being up, part of it is because they are leaning into players better. I don't know, the celebrations are, it's not the, what's the guy from Tampa who was in the home run derby, the junior?
Rosarena?
No, junior, the guy who
Caminero.
lost. Yeah, you saw the video of his home run trot in the Dominican League, the 43
the final, the biggest home run in Dominican League winter ball history.
I don't think that baseball will ever get to that point, but I do think that those things are a little bit more accepted. You don't see drilling as much for that stuff anymore, and that's where the sport has to go. I think that's another thing to learn from the Savannah Bananas. It is a TikTok world, right? It is a short form, how do things go viral, and I think that's where baseball needs to be, but I think they're getting better at that.
They're going to use Hispanic Savannah Bananas. That's the next thing that's going to happen, is they're just going to play straight Hispanic music. The celebrations will be tailored towards
It's a great idea. I've never heard.
They're going to do that.
Jesse.
I'm sure they thought about that.
And then barnstorm Latin America.
You can do it easily. You can do a barnstorm America. You just you just mark it on the Spanish radio stations. They're going to do that, guaranteed, because you have enough 100%. Players. They'll dance. It'll be a different.
Because you just put it out there.
It'll be a different product.
And you guys have this huge following.
I like the diversity of conversation that this gives the people who we built the show for, which is maybe a more, I don't want polished is the wrong word, but just interested in baseball on a more nuanced level or more nuanced scale. And so I like this angle, and
I would say
affects baseball.
We haven't talked, which is fine, but we haven't talked at all about like sponsorship sales. Well,
let's talk about it.
No, I don't care.
Yeah,
that's like.
I was going to ask if there's anything you want. I was going to ask you if there's anything that you want to hit on that we can kind of lead you to.
Whatever works. I think it's been great. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
What is your, and it doesn't have to be the one that generated the most revenue, but what's your favorite partnership during your tenure there?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I listen, the building had never had a name on it. So I think you have to say putting a name on the building. I just heard you, Danny, said something about LoanDepot gets rocking. Yeah. I actually heard an in-game interview with Clayton McCullough a couple days ago, where he called it the Loan Dome. I believe.
We used to call it the Loan Dome.
I'd never heard that.
We call it the Poe in my group chats.
I've actually never really met. I met Clayton once, but those things make me smile still, because that's probably from a deal perspective, the biggest deal I've done in my career, and what'll be on my tombstone. But I think I think it goes back to a lot of what we talked about earlier. We had a lot of repairing relationships and making people realize we, Bruce, Derek, I were different. And so it's a lot more of the local deals that came on early that weren't on when we got here because of and again, I've never met the previous owner, the previous president, so I'm not going to cast an opinion. But what I heard from those folks was they didn't want to be part of the organization when they were part of it. And so I think that's what I'm most proud of. You know, I'll call out AutoNation, who's been a longtime partner. This was their first year not back, but were with us for 7 seasons. I met the CMO in December of my first year, and he said, we would never work with the Marlins, but you seem different, right? We did an Ocean Bank deal within the first 6 weeks of being here. Big deal, same thing. UKG, which at the time was a Miami Heat partner, but wouldn't work with the Marlins organization, we were able to bring in, right? So I think for me, it was the relationships that we built that trusted us because they believed it was a different time that I'm most proud of. And then I would continue with that. I think all business is about relationships. But I think, you know, one of the ways, and we had grown the business 145% on the sponsorship side when I left, with a team that wasn't necessarily always competing, right? Certainly we had 2020 and we had 2023, and I threw 2020 in for you, Adrian, because of our earlier conversation.
With no revenue because
right.
No fans.
But, you know, certainly there were some lean years also, and the business kept growing, and it was because of the relationships that I and others had built, the support that brands wanted to show us, and the delivery that my teams had ensured, because it wasn't necessarily through the roof attendance, or again, then I'm not throwing stones, that's just, you can look at the standings, or huge wins, but we continued to grow the business significantly because of relationships, and that's what business is about. And you know, a lot of that is, I've got the good fortune of being front facing on that, but the delivery of the sponsorship team and the operations team and the tickets team and all the folks that we were able to work with, that over-delivered because we needed our partners to be back. So I think that's probably what I'm most proud of.
You came here for the Marlins, right?
I did, yeah.
But you're here, and you're here for, like, this is now your home. What are your larger level observations about Miami overall now that you've spent some time here?
Yeah, it's a great place to raise a family. Can always be outside. I think, you know, I was impressed even when I got here in 2017 for this job. I think I had only known the Delano and South Beach and New Year's Eve and Collins. Actually, this is a great story. So 2017 of March. So Marlins weren't even on the horizon. I'm working at Excel. My son at the time was 11 months old, and my wife and I went on our first airplane trip since he had been born. And we came and stayed at the 23rd and Collins. And I remember, and by the way, we had always come to Miami for New Year's, whatever, and we'd eat only on Collins, right? You have these hotels, just eat there. I remember her saying, hey, we're gonna go to this restaurant in a new place called Wynwood. And she took me to KYU, which at the time was brand new. It had just won a James Beard Award. And I remember taking an Uber from the one hotel across what I now know as a Julia Tuttle, and just being like, why the fuck are we going this direction? Can't we just stay what we always know? And the irony is 8 months later, I lived here, and bringing it back to what I was saying, you know, it got a bad rap even then for the art scene, the food scene, you know, kudos to Adrian, who's accelerating the art scene. But, and now where it is 25 versus 17, it's so well cultured. The diversity for my kid, the outdoors for my kid. My wife has a business. I'm wearing the hat, State of Kid. If you guys want kids' clothes and classes for your kids, go South Miami, the Design District, and
birthday parties,
Miami Beach. Got to know that better. But yeah, this is our home for the foreseeable future.
Awesome, man. Awesome.
Real quick, just
the under 11 Little League team.
Oh well, listen,
right.
that's a whole different discussion. You know, that's we're going to be GMs here after that. But, you know, again, just sort of looking back on your tenure, you mentioned some of the things that, you know, that you're proud of. What did you learn either about yourself, about the business, about the world, just from the beginning? Because you already came in with some experience. You weren't like a, you know, pup when you started the job. What's different about you or that you've learned since you started that job? Yeah,
no, I think that's a great question. First of all, I think nothing beats hard work, right? I don't think there are people that would say, you know, Adrian was in those halls. I don't think there's anyone who outworked me, even at the leader level, or cared more or was more passionate about the job and the business and the team than I was. And I think, you know, again, I think nothing beats having that passion and feeling like you're all pulling in the same direction. And we didn't talk a ton about at all about my experience as a marketing agent, which is great because that's what most people usually want to talk about because it's the most sexy, but I'm happy that we didn't. But, you know, I came here as a really good salesperson. And I think you get more responsibility because your sales are good, but all of a sudden you start taking over other departments and other things that maybe aren't in your wheelhouse, but you learn them. But I'm such a better business person today. Things like margin and scale and projections and a lot of the stuff that we've actually talked about today. Ironically, you know, when we were off camera, we said we barely talked about sales. All of the things that I got to experience as a business person that make me better for, you know, my current role, for whatever's next, are how I'm different. Yeah. And so, like I always say, I had a wonderful tenure, great 7 years, proud of everything we've done, and I wish them nothing but the best.
What is next? What fires you up right now?
Taking my kid to school, taking my kid to Little League practice, going to the gym.
Six-pack.
Yeah, no, I am working in a consultative manner, that's the word, consultative manner for a number of brands and projects. Listen, I have a skill. I know a lot of people, and I'm really good at connecting people, and I think that there's ways to monetize that. I'm really good at generating revenue and helping brands figure out how to maximize their own revenue. So today, that's what I'm doing. You go to 100 baseball games a year, you get into the office at 8:30, 9 o'clock, no matter what time the game ended last night. The ability to sort of make your own schedule and help out on projects that interest you is where my focus is right now.
Yeah, there's a real freedom in that now. You have a freedom that baseball could not have allowed you to possibly have, especially at the level that you were
Certainly, but you also have a mortgage.
True. The most relatable thing you said right there. But also this range to explore the other parts of your humanity that baseball just like kind of, it boxes you into just like being attentive to it year round, really. So.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing people don't really understand is these jobs, not just, people think the baseball side are year round, people think the business side, it's like, oh, well, you're not in season. That's actually when the hard work is. I always say it's a different hours because you're not staying until 10 o'clock at 80 games. You're leaving at 6 or 7 o'clock in home time for dinner, put your kid to bed, whatever. But you're planning for the season, especially on the sponsorship side. You got to lock in 80, 90% of your business by opening day, right? So the real work happens in the off season, and there really is no downtime. Again, people understand that on the baseball side because there's always development, there's free agency, you can always make a trade, whatever. On the business side, I think there's a perception of, oh, you guys are in off season, so can you do this? And it's like, no, actually, that's the harder work.
So it is for me, man. That was awesome.